Welcome, everyone. So glad to see everyone here. Welcome, everyone, to the Art of Conversation, a webinar brought to you by The Day. We are very excited to be here today. Joining us are two special guests, Sarah Davies and Robert Poole. Just some technicalities before we begin. The session will be recorded and shared online and via email after. By attending, you are consenting to this. A Q&A will take place at the end of the session. Just type your questions in the chat, and by all means, feel free during the webinar to put your questions in. Lastly, you'll receive the recording of the webinar and a form to fill out to get your CPD certificate via email tomorrow. Please feel free to fill out the form if you'd like the certificate. But let's get started and dive right in. To really understand what we are looking to address when it comes to Oracy and conversation, I just want to paint a little bit of a picture. So children from economically disadvantaged backgrounds start school behind their peers and fall further behind throughout their school careers. A child from a disadvantaged family on average hears 32 million fewer words a year than a child from a more privileged background. Disadvantaged children are 2.3 times more likely to suffer from speech, language, and communication needs. Young people with poor communication skills are more likely to experience behavioral problems. And this is really why Oracy is so critical. The Educational Endowment Foundation found that Oracy education had a substantial impact on the result of pupil premium children. And again, this is why it's such a huge part of the day's mission is to boost Oracy skills for all young people through our resources. We recognize its pivotal role in shaping the personal development of young people. So let's find out more from our experts on their thoughts on Oracy and how to bring it into the classroom. So I'm going to give you a little background on both of our guests today. First, Sarah. So Sarah Davies is the author of Talking About Oracy, which focuses on the development of effective communication beyond the parameters of the classroom. She's currently an assistant head teacher at a secondary academy in the northwest of England. Alongside her teaching, she has also written articles for SecEd, The Head Teacher, and The Teaching Times, as well as presenting at regional and national Research Ed and Rethinking Education conferences. Robert is head of PSHE in a large secondary school and a qualified English and geography teacher. In addition, he is the editor of the journal Education for Tomorrow, was awarded the Ron Todd Award for Social Justice, and named a Big Issue Top 100 Changemaker. Fabulous. So let's hand over first to Sarah now to tell us more about her work and, of course, her book. Over to you, Sarah.
Hi, and thank you, Matt. Can everyone hear me okay? Absolutely incredible. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. As Matt has already mentioned, it is such an important topic, and myself and Robert are both equally keen to be able to discuss this with as many people as possible. Just to give you a bit of a background about myself. So I came into understanding and developing my ideas of Oracy from my background as an English teacher, but more the frustrations that I felt as an English teacher as to how Oracy had almost been sidelined and was put towards a specific subject, so to speak. And what I think we don't seem to, as practitioners, really take an understanding of sometimes is just how fundamentally important Oracy is into development academically, socially, spiritually, morally, ethically, as an individual. So what myself and my focus has always been on is how can we prepare our students for life outside of the classroom and inside of the classroom. And in both circumstances, the ability to be an effective communicator is one of the fundamental basics that we need to address properly. So the book, and I was so fortunate when I wrote Talking About Oracy, and the fact that one of the biggest things that I did was made sure that collaboration was key. So I made sure that, we weren't just talking from a secondary perspective. We were talking about sixth forms, we were talking about primary schools, and we were talking about how Oracy is so important in every single subject and in every single circumstance. And I've been so fortunate to be able to talk to people and to be able to understand their premise behind it, what they believe Oracy actually is and what it is not. So, one of the fundamental principles that we talk about quite a lot is the fact that speaking and listening. So is it a speaking and listening? Well, actually, no, because when you're looking at the work that's been done by Oracy Cambridge and Voice 21, you'll see the 4 different components of Oracy, and you know how it's every single component put together. So you're thinking about your body language, you're thinking about, you know, the cognitive side of it, you're thinking about, yes, it is, can we speak? But under no circumstance should any kind of establishment be thinking, oh yeah, no, well, we do Oracy because we have a debate club. That's not the case in the slightest. It's not just throwing a debate club into the mix and hoping for the best. It's, do your young people know how to alter or to communicate with a variety of audiences? Do they understand the fact that actually, when we say speaking and listening, it is listening. It isn't just waiting for your next time that you're going to speak. Can we, you know, really interpret people? Can we read tones? And what's really interesting is talking to pastoral teams as well and going and thinking and considering about how many times would behavior issues actually have been, you know, resisted or at least calmed down had we have looked at miscommunication along the way. How many times has a behavior issue come from the catalyst being a misunderstanding and a misinterpretation, or, you know, not registering the right tone or not registering the right detail? And there's so many different, you know, looks that we can go on to there. We can look at Handel's zone of proximity, for example, when we're going down the behavior route, and how uncomfortable people feel in certain situations, and how actually how we approach those situations could then have a detrimental impact on them. But then when we're looking at the academic side, how, you know, when we can talk about things like fear of failure and this idea of the even the premise of you expecting and us as practitioners expecting students to be able to just pick up a pen and write, and not to have that reasoning time, that think, you know, when we call it that thinking time, sometimes we need to be able to articulate our reasoning behind it, so that we do have the opportunity to do so before we put pen to paper, so that we're feeling more confident on it. And you know, there's so much, and there's so much of a remit that we can explore when it comes to oracy, that this is why I'm just so happy that people have attended today, because it's just, it's about being able to take each of those components and understand really what is everyone's role when it comes to oracy, and how can everybody support in this? How can everybody ensure that our students, the people within our care, are prepared for life outside of the classroom, are prepared for different circumstances, and not just prepared in employment, but also in things like relationships? You know, how are they able to speak to each other? The age-old one of "I'm fine." Can they interpret that properly? You know, can they be able to have those discussions? Can they articulate their own feelings and their own awareness of it? Do they have the confidence in which to do so because it's been nourished from a small age and a young age? You know, have schools welcomed this and welcomed the idea of oracy? Or since, you know, July the 4th last year, where Keir Starmer announced that it was part of the 5-point plan for Labour, have they just gone, oh no, I need to include oracy? What are we going to do about it? Okay, you know, it's actually, are we doing this properly? Is it, you know, because it is part of that triad. Literacy, numeracy, and oracy are the skills that they need from the start. But even then, in order to gain literacy, think about how students learn to read. They have to learn to read through phonemes, so they have to learn to read through their oracy skills. So it is very much a fundamental skill that we need to really cement to get right, and to allow and support our young students to flourish in day-to-day life.
Absolutely. And I just love how you've expanded the notion of oracy. And I know everyone in the audience is going to add to this thread of what is it and how can we, again, make it bigger so that we can really tackle it within schools. You know, on that point, maybe we can move to Robert to talk and really just introduce your work. And I know you're using it within your school. Over to you, Robert.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Sarah. It's brilliant. The term oracy we've heard about, you know, it was first coined to try and give speaking an equal footing to literacy and numeracy. But unfortunately, its importance still isn't, it's not seen as being as important. And even more worrying, it's been actively discouraged in some schools, with, you know, a focus on silent classrooms and direct instruction, with the teacher stood at the front of the room. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a place for this. It's just that we should see these things as tools in an array that we can choose from for the right moment, for the right time. The importance of high quality talk, like Sarah said, it can't be underestimated. I often think that, I understand something. I've read a book or I've listened to a podcast that, yeah, I really get that. I understand it. But it's only really clicks when I've got to teach it to someone else or discuss it with someone else. And if we think about it, talk is the original form of teaching. The oral tradition's been around far longer than the written word has. I had a head department at my school, and he passed on this saying, which had been passed on to him in oral tradition. And this saying was that the best teachers are the best storytellers. And I think that is what teaching is really about. As teachers, we've probably all been guilty of downplaying the importance of the spoken word in our classrooms. We have these fantastic discussions, questioning, and what do we say at the end of it? Right, now write it down. Why though? Do we ask ourselves why though? And often the answer is because it's not real unless it's in the books. It provides evidence. Evidence for who? Evidence for Ofsted, evidence for SLT, evidence for parents, and so on. And education, unfortunately, is subject to fads. Things come in and out of fashion. I've been teaching over a decade now, and when I first started, group work was big in fashion. Then it sort of went out of fashion. Now we're maybe hearing about it again. And we always say, the only thing constant in education is the rate of change. Now, a recent thing, well, maybe not so recent, but, government ministers from the Department for Education, they do what's called policy tourism. They travel around the world and they try and find out what works best in different countries. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, learning from other places and learning from best practice. And whole class instruction was seen as being a technique that schools that were doing well, countries that were doing well, high up in the PISA tables, were doing. Now, obviously, you need to look, you can't compare these schools like for like, different socioeconomic conditions and traditions and other factors at play that go beyond the classroom. But they found that this whole class instruction seemed to be a teaching method which was, involved in them all. Now, what they did was they took this idea of whole class instruction, they exported it to English classrooms, but they missed the really vital component, and that was the dialogue that went with this whole class instruction. And the schools that were at the top of these league tables, the countries at the top of these league tables, were all countries that put a particular emphasis on talk in the classroom and high quality talk. Now, we seem to be a bit scared of talk over here, and apparently there's a story that a UK government advisor was asked to push Oracy in schools, and he said he didn't want to do it because it might encourage idle chatter. And of course, this isn't what dialogic teaching is about, isn't what Oracy is about. It's about high quality talk. Now, a lot of my research, my readings have been around Robin Alexander's work, the University of Cambridge, and he's done some fantastic work on dialogic teaching and talk. And he breaks it down as the role of talk. What is the role of talking? He said that we use talk for a number of different things. We use talk for thinking. Language builds connections in the brain. We use it for learning. Talk helps the scaffolding of understanding a topic. We use it for mastery. When we talk, we deepen our own understanding of it. For communication in everyday life, like Sarah said, most of our interactions are spoken. Writing, reading are quite solitary, but we use speech to relate to others. It's interactive, it's inclusive. It should be. Acculturation, talk helps us find out what we have in common with each other. It shares our cultures, our belief systems. And within society, our democratic engagement within society is based around, our whole democratic system is based around discussion, about talk, debate, argument, questioning. And if pupils haven't got these, then they can't engage within these in an effective way. And teacher talk is so important as well, because our talk and listening, speaking and listening, as Sarah says, is so important because it helps us to understand what a pupil understands, what they don't understand, and what we can support them with. Now, as Matt said at the beginning, the Education Endowment Foundation has done loads of work, and this proved that dialogic teaching can improve pupil outcomes by 2 months. So there's also a social justice issue here as well. Now, there's a fantastic video from School 21, who've done great work with Oracy, where they interview a primary age pupil, and he says he loves speaking, he loves Oracy because it makes him feel heard. He says, and this is the quote, he says, "You're part of the world and you feel respected and important. And isn't that what we want for all of our children? Now, improving oracy can help narrow this gap between the privileged and the less so. Although, again, there's issues beyond the classroom, which obviously need addressing. So what can we do practically, in our practice? Now, good quality talk has to be explicitly taught, and it's important to set norms. Now, I like the phrase norms rather than rules for conversation. And the norms of conversation are what we do every day. When we have a conversation, we look at the other person, we listen to them carefully, we take turns, we encourage them. And these sometimes have to be made explicit to pupils. This is how we're going to speak. Not because it's a school rule, not because I'm going to punish you if you don't do it, but just because this is what conversation it is. Now, it's also important to be explicit about what good speech looks like, and we need to model it in our day-to-day practice. We need to tell pupils, this is what you need to do. You need to state your position clearly. You need to distinguish between the facts and the opinions. It's okay to change your mind in light of what you hear. Now, Sarah made a brilliant point, said it's not just about putting in a debate in society in your school, and it's not just about putting a debate into your lesson. There's many different forms of building oracy. That could be group work, and that's fantastic, but it needs to be built up too. You could start with things I'm sure we've all done, think, pair, share, and build up from that. Talk to your partner, what do they think? This might not come naturally. This might be something that you have to work on. And if it's not something that pupils have been exposed to in the past, you will have to help them with it, the same as you would in the written work. You'll have to scaffold the responses, maybe use sentence starters or word banks, and provide feedback to them constantly, get them to expand on their responses, ask others what they think, bouncy questions around the room. What do you mean by that? Can you expand on that? Does it always look that way? Why do you think that? Who can add on to this? So it's about creating this dialogue within the classroom. And there are loads of different ways to bring oracy in. And obviously, the day makes it so much easier. As part of PSHE, we deliver this through tutor time sessions, and once a week what I'll do is we'll have the articles that, from the day, and they could be used to discuss within PSHE sessions. Now what this means is we could give one article to all the different year groups because we have the different reading ages on the day, so we could do it to Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, etc. It's differentiated, but they all have the same thing, which is a brilliant jumping off point in the class because it gives an up-to-date news story that's accessible, it's age appropriate, it's well researched, and it enables me to ensure there's consistency across the team, which can be hard because being delivered in tutor time, there might be 50 different teachers delivering these. So the consistency and the high quality of it is fantastic. The day's articles are built with oracy in mind. They're built around a question, and questioning is at the heart of oracy practice. And there's a discussion question in there. There's always that, and there's the balance, different responses. Sometimes, these can be quite complex, quite controversial topics, and it provides that sort of framework, which as teachers, it's sometimes hard to find, the high quality resources there. So what I normally do is I'll read an article myself, or we'll ask volunteers who I know can speak fluently to read out the article. And then the key bit is then that discussion at the end. Give pupils time to think about it. Give them time to discuss it in pairs, in small groups, turn around, talk to the people behind you, however you want to structure it. But then listen to their responses, ask them to extend, ask them to elaborate, try to shut up and listen. The temptation is always to jump in and give your opinion on it, but, resist the temptation. It's through this dialogue, through this discussion is how they will learn and how they will create their own understanding of these topics. And there's always going to be barriers to this. I once talked to a girl who was an elected mute. She found contributing to discussion very difficult. And in a CPD session that I had recently myself, the teacher delivering the session said that she thought the most important part of education was that each pupil leaves with their self-esteem intact. And who can argue with that? But for this girl in question, cold calling, picking on her to answer a question, it just wouldn't have worked. So we discussed it with her parents, discussed it with her, and we agreed that we would build up slowly. I'd ask her closed questions, sometimes a no, yes and no answers, but she could gain a confidence in doing so. And by year 11, she was cracking jokes, making fun of me, all of these things. So the deal was, though, that if she wasn't speaking, she was going to be listening, she was going to be thinking, and teaching that active listening is as important as the spoken aspect of this. And sometimes, you might have to help them, structure this as well, to have things in your repertoire that you're able to do. Talking partners, what did your partner just say? Do you agree with them? Do you agree with what they said? So different ways of actively encouraging, don't let them get off. Because I think this is sometimes the fear that, well, one person will be talking and the rest are just switched off. Don't let them get away with it. Bounce the questions around the room. What do you think? And insist on this fluency in their answers. Now, the ultimate goal of education is to teach students to think, not just to be able to repeat somebody else's thinking. And I think that is what Oracy is all about, the dialogue, the discussions, teaching pupils to think. And I'll end with a quote from Paulo Freire, who was the author of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he wrote that without dialogue, there's no communication, and without communication, there can be no education. Thank you very much.
That's fabulous. What a great quote to end on. And Rob, I really appreciate you bringing in the barriers that you're overcoming, because if we don't talk about that head on, we can't have that full discussion about Oracy. And I think maybe a thread I'm taking from both you and Sarah is this idea of maybe it's incumbent on us to bring Oracy back and let it have its moment again, because as you say, in education, things can be phasal. But I love that we're all talking about all the tools that we have to really address this within schools and in our communities. With that said, we actually have a poll question for both you and Sarah, and it's a multiple choice one. And you might have covered some of this off a little bit, Robert, in just sharing how you use it within your PSHE. But I'll ask this to Sarah and to you, Robert. But do you promote Oracy? And I think I know the answer to this because you have said it, but do you promote Oracy in your lessons? And then the multiple choices really: A, every lesson; B, at least once a day; C, at least once a week; D, at least once a month; or E, less than once a month. What would it be for you, Sarah? We'll start with you.
So this is where it's quite an interesting one, because mine would be A. But one of the things that I say to teachers, particularly when delivering this as CPD, because usually when you're delivering it this is CPD, like, okay, today we're going to talk about Oracy, we're going to lead, and they go, oh, not another thing. And it's not in the slightest. In essence, we are all, and this is where it's important to pick up on what Robert said as well. Every single lesson is an opportunity for Oracy in different forms. Whether it is a dialogic lesson, dialogic teaching strategy, whether it's teacher-led, whether it's student-led, every single lesson is an opportunity. They're either engaging with those listening skills more, they're incorporating those collaborative skills more. And I think the big thing is the explicit awareness of this and bringing this to the forefront. Okay, this next bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk quite a lot at you. I'm aware of the fact that this is a lot of information. So whilst I'm doing this, I want you to be processing it and taking those notes if you can. And just really, encouraging and acknowledging those skills that they're going to be using at that time. The only lesson where I could think that maybe they won't be doing that is if they're in a full assessment for the entire hour and you don't even speak to them at the start. Other than that, every single lesson incorporates Oracy in there. And a lot of the times when it comes to leading on CPD, it's allowing staff the opportunity to acknowledge that it's not an add-on. It's not additional things that's going to have to be done. It's not a rewriting of the curriculum. It's are you considering the way that you're approaching the learning, and is there a way that you can do it that does incorporate more Oracy skills?
Wonderful. That's really great. What about Robert? What about you? You want to weigh in on that?
I think as teachers, we're not very good at spotting what we're doing well. And Oracy is something that for a lot of people, it's probably is part of your day-to-day practice without you even realizing it. And sometimes it's just about fine-tuning it, and sometimes it's about adding things to your repertoire. As Sarah says, it shouldn't be anything extra. It shouldn't be having to replan your curriculum. It should just be something that can be incorporated as part of it. A really important thing is to think about when we are doing lessons, what is it we're assessing? What needs to be, what's the outcome? What's our lesson objective for this? Does it have to be a written outcome to this, or could it be a discussion? Are there ways of doing this that could include oracy? And often the answer is yes. Don't fall into that trap of thinking everything has to be written down. But day to day, yeah, 100%. I mean, they say that, a third of your lesson should be questioning, the rest should be that, that discussion. And for a teacher, if you can fine tune that and get your questioning right, you'll find that everything else follows on. Your written answers will improve. The knowledge and the understanding will improve. It's not an add-on. It's not an extra. It is an integral part of that understanding.
Absolutely. Well said. Really good said. Now, what we're going to do, we're actually going to put that question to the audience because we want to get their input as well. And I think my colleague Chloe will put it up so you can answer right now. There it is. And then we can all have a stab at it. I think everyone's probably just about wrapping up voting. We should have the results in a moment. Well, there we go. 70% every lesson. That's heartening. 16% at least once a day, and so forth. 9% at least once a week. So that's really great to hear. And I'm really curious to just as we continue talking about this, how we can improve those numbers. And Robert, I'm probably going to lean on the notion you brought up, which is this idea of norms. I think I'm going to start using that too, because I think that's how we can kind of create these great habits in the classroom. And I think to that point, in times of the essence now, because I want to leave a lot of time for all of our questions in the chat and everyone who's joined us today, but I want to give a really brief overview of how the day can be used to improve Oracy. Some of you are members already of the day and some of you are not, but what I'm going to do is share my screen right now. You should be able to see it in a moment. And this is, I chose this article purposely, of course. It's Business School Adds Chit Chat to Curriculum. So clearly we're talking about this in our articles and at the day. And I want to show you some of the key features of the day and how it can be used by your students in form time, PSHE, or debate clubs. And I think it's important to know we always begin our article with a question. Back to this idea, the questions are more important. And that question always precedes the article. It's right here. So do we need lessons in small talk? And when I'm going to skim through our article right here, but when a student reads this, we then remind them also about that question, because that is so important that they see that they're engaging with that idea critically at the end. And what the day does so well is provides a stance so that the student can actively debate that article. And you'll see that right here. So what I mean by that, so whether or not they have formed their own opinion or not, here we can see a yes stance. So yes, small talk is vital. A no stance, no, it's useless. Or a more nuanced stance that applies both the yes and no argument. And I think that's really important for that nuance and that complexity. But we know the day is doing its job well when a student, by actively listening to his classmate, begins to question their own stance and even crosses the aisle due to the robust conversation these sides empower students to take. We continue to invite students to engage in speaking by including two famous quotes, and that's right here on the left-hand side, by two prolific thinkers. Now, this enables students to contextualize today's article with history, but also to reflect and challenge its ideas in further conversation. And I think that's really important by asking basically right here, what do you think? So we're always inviting that conversation. And this hopefully will lead to lively discourse. Furthermore, we invite students to dive in deeper right here on the right by giving them practical tools with external websites. So you can see here, there's actually a video, how to master the art of communication. Well, that's perfect because there's so many tools that students can be using, teachers as well. Our Dive In Deeper section offer these practical tools so we can embed Oracy and broaden students' worldviews and horizons. But we also offer ways to become an expert with further resources here, right here at the bottom. And you can see that here. But really what makes the day special and what I really want to highlight is our 6 steps to discovery, which is an inquiry-led framework that invites students to get even more curious about what they read. Here, students connect, wonder, investigate, construct, express, and reflect so that they can articulate their thoughts, finding new ways to speak with confidence. So our articles even have a poll at the bottom, encouraging even more discussion. You can find that right here at the bottom if you click here. Students can vote and see how other students feel about this subject. So I'll hide that for a second. But in order to reach as many students as possible, access is so crucial to us here at the day. That's why we have tools to ensure our articles can be read by all students. So if you look here at the bottom left, there's an accessibility widget. I'm going to click on it. A menu pops up and students can toggle between different settings. We have bigger text, more contrast, dyslexia friendly, and other features that will make our articles as accessible as possible. So similarly, at the beginning of our articles, I'm just going to close that. We have what we call a beeline reader up here. And if I click on this blue shield, learners have the option to choose different gradients to help promote readability and hone concentration. So if I click here and make it bright, you can see how the text changes. So speaking of readability, our articles are in short, easy to read paragraphs, as you can see right here. Words in bold can be, you can hover over them, and then you get the definition in real time. So the articles are fully understood by students as they're reading. So we really differentiate content, and I'm going to show you how we do that by scrolling up here to our top toolbar, resources, to reach every student, no matter what their learning need might be, because the day is so much more than articles. We engage in Oracy through our videos of the day, which you can find right here, photos of the week, and daily posters, just to name a few, right here in our features. All of these tools help students speak up and get involved in classroom conversations. We recognize that there are a multitude of ways into Oracy, so it's really important to highlight whatever a student needs, we hope to offer that. In closing, our students' most valuable instrument is their voice, and the day serves as a resource that will help fine-tune this instrument, ensuring students truly have the best shot at success in school and later in life, whether they enter higher education, the workforce, or maybe, as Sarah mentioned, even their own personal lives. So we owe it to our students to give them all the tools at our disposal so they have the highest chance of success. So thank you everyone for letting me do that demo. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I think we have a lot of questions to answer for Sarah and Robert to answer, that is. And we might go to the first one right now. So the first question for one of our audience members, can you see any dangers in creating a hierarchy of how to speak? And that's in quotes. By being pragmatic, are we actually reinforcing that certain accents, codes, modes of speech are acceptable and others are not? And that's, I'm sorry, that's from Ben Pierce. Thank you, Ben.
Robert, am I all right to start this one? So for those people that maybe don't know me that well, I am from Oldham. Now, Oldham is famous for many things, including a particularly strong accent. And I will always remember when I was doing an interview, or I was doing a job interview, and I was going for a PGCE job, and I actually got turned down. And their excuse when they turned me down was that they said that I'd said "tar" to a student. And I want to reinforce something now, like Oracy. There is, when I did all of the studying for my book, one of the things that I found is of course there is a bias. There is a demographic understanding of accents, and there's the dialect bias, and this was quite prominent with Yorkshire, Birmingham, and Liverpool. Obviously, the most stringent ones. What Oracy needs to be is authentic, and what it isn't is it's not an episode of My Fair Lady. when we say that Oracy is important and it's important for students to understand, what students have to understand is how they craft their conversation. So the cognitive abilities of it, as opposed to, the refinement of it. So it's more like, is your student likely to turn around and call you bro or G? Or, is your student treating you like a friend? Or does your student actually use, just slightly formal language, or just an understanding of a changing audience? It's not in any way, shape, or form an articulation lesson, and it never should be. When we're talking about, and I know that when myself and Robert were both talking about how you do have to be quite clear on what the expectations are. Those still need to be very generic expectations. So no shouting out, no, what you generally expect. Audible. Is it audible? These are the kind of things that we're looking for. Not that every single sentence is full and heavily articulate, because even on the best of days, that's not going to happen for me. I can't model that. So it's not going to be that kind of approach. You have to go down the approach of, is it something that is accessible for all and is there to support all?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I understand what you're saying. And then maybe over to you, Robert, because the questions are coming in fast and furious. This is more for your insight, because you really gave us a great example of how you're using it within school. But this member of the audience said, often the barrier in my school is getting the students to understand, appreciate that talking discussion is also learning. So they're asking, what would you do in that situation if confronted with that?
Yeah, I suppose it's about setting down those expectations and explaining it to them, and it will take some time for them to realize this, because they will be so used to the only way that they are assessed is through their written work. There used to be, there was a formal, I mean, there still is in English, a spoken language part assessment, not given as much credit as it used to. If you go to other countries, in France, the French oral exam is a massive part of it, and people will come from all around to listen to these these presentations, and it's about just perseverance, really. It might be that they don't realize, but then again, discussing with them and have those conversations with them. Some will not see the purpose of group work. There's always, you'll have, I just did all the work, and normally the boys didn't do any work, and they just messed around while I was discussing it, and I know it all anyway, so what's the point in me talking about it? But if you persevere with this and you set those norms and expectations, and if you come back and speak to those same pupils again about this and ask them to, the thoughts on it, you probably will find that they go, oh yeah, well, actually, by discussing that, I did get it more. And reinforcing as well that, talk for talk's sake, we learn through the talking. It doesn't have to be assessed. It doesn't have to be something written down to make it real.
Those are great tips. And that question, by the way, was from Michael Liddy. And for Sarah, Amy Fallon asks, do you have any insights on some common pitfalls when trying to introduce Oracy across the wider school?
Well, I think, and it goes back to what's just been mentioned there, and I know that it's popped up on the chat as well, obviously, other than the fact that I did miss the memo about what we were supposed to wear today, guys. But it's okay. No, so some of the common pitfalls, the most obvious pitfall that I will say is the fact that it is not a subject-specific skill. So when we talked then, and when we mentioned about the English spoken language exam, so the English spoken language exam is now a compulsory part. So I know that it was asked before, it's a compulsory part of the GCSE. It is assessed from a centre point of view. You have to be able to provide an understanding that has been done. It has to be recorded, and students either get a pass, merit, or a distinction. However, since the change in the specification, although it is a compulsory part of the GCSE, it is not in any way, shape, or form connected to the GCSE grade. So it has to be provided, but it plays no insight into what GCSE grade is awarded in English language. So even with English teachers now, it has become perceived as an inconvenient add-on. It is something that takes time out of the curriculum. I know it is something. So whereas before, previously in the curriculum, it actually formed a part of the percentage of your GCSE grade. Now it is something that needs to be done, but from an English teacher's perspective, it takes time out of their curriculum in order for that to be done. It's perceived as an inconvenience when I'm talking to people, as opposed to a necessary part. Now, off the back of that, following on from the question, the common pitfalls is, first of all, the acknowledgement of every single member of staff that Oracy is everyone's business. And why is that everyone's business? What impact does this have on your day? And it's about making sure that everyone is aware of those facts. And sometimes it's going back to the start of going, what is Oracy? What do we know it from a staff perspective? And then breaking it up into okay, how can we incorporate this in a subject specific perspective? How can we support this in a pastoral perspective? So where the pitfalls are by not acknowledging and understanding any misconceptions. Don't be afraid to say what it is not. Instead of always leading with what is it, start with what is it not.
That's really great. No, that's wonderful. And this is a question for Robert, and Sarah too, because of your wonderful book, Sarah. But Aliyah Salim asks, which writers, research bodies would you suggest for further research? And whatever you do say, I think it would be worth us including in our email follow-up to everyone who's attended today, because I think a lot of people are curious. Exactly, plug it, put it up there. But I think we've all come away with this idea of wanting to know more and go and get more research. So yeah, Robert and Sarah, why don't you weigh on, both of you, on that one, if you will?
Obviously, Sarah's book is the first place to start. But oracycambridge.org is a really good source of information. Robin Alexander's work on dialogic teaching, Neil Mercer's work is fantastic. In the journal I edit, Education for Tomorrow, we have had articles in the past around dialogic reading groups and things like that. But yeah, there is loads out there, and it's about sifting through it. Lots of research, but then looking for those practical strategies as well.
Perfect. We're noting all those down. And Sarah, thank you do you want to show your book again and just really put it up there? Because I don't know if
I realized I put it up there and I put it up with a blurred background, so you can tell it's a really good color of green. But no, it is worth mentioning as well with that. One of the things that I found when I published the book is when you go and you have to sign and you have to register an interest in publishing a book, you have to obviously look at what's already out there. And one of the things that I was astounded at is how little book-wise is out there. Oracy Cambridge and Voice 21 have been absolutely amazing to give us those insights. But when you're looking at how much has been actually done in the publication realm of Oracy as an explicit tool, as opposed to a supportive tool in everywhere, it's actually quite minimal. So it was so good to be able to get the perspective of other practitioners. So Zoe Enza is in there, Sam Strickland is in there as well. Being able to speak to and discuss how different strategies are being used by different people has been really, really a fundamental part of it, and making sure that everyone's aware how important it is.
Wow, that's great. No, that's really good. I'm conscious we are really running to the last minute. Are there any closing comments maybe before we say goodbye, or anything you want to address to the audience? This has been really enlightening and really interesting. Robert or Sarah?
I've just sort of reinforced, how important speaking and dialogue is to every aspect, and we need a campaign to get it to the forefront again. Away with silent classrooms, and let's get pupils productively talking.
Absolutely. And Sarah?
I just want to say a massive thank you for everyone joining us. I mean, the fact that we've got so many people here is a testament just to how important it is, and that we're all flying that flag and we're making sure that everyone's aware of just how important, it is for everyone, because what we need to be doing on these cold January nights is remembering why we do this as well. And we are doing this to ensure that our young people have the best possible advantages ever. And by allowing them to articulate, to read, and to just be able to communicate with other people, is a massive factor in order to do that. So no, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. And my closing thoughts are just that as a member of the day creates a format for debate and discussion. Every article we publish and opinions are encouraged to be expressed in confidence, with the playing field being leveled for every student. So just the technicality to say there'll be a short survey after this where you can request more information about the day and tell us what you thought of today's webinar. And again, just to remind you, you'll receive that recording of the webinar and a form to fill out to get your CPD certificate via email tomorrow. So just fill out that form. And thank you again, Sarah and Robert. It's just been a really wonderful afternoon. So hope to see you all again too. All the best.